The Rosewood Imperial Grand Ballroom held 307 guests. Not one of them said a single word. Did anybody else smell that stench? James Anderson, CEO, $85,000. Patek Philippe on his left wrist pointed at the black janitor, mopping bourbon off his shoe. You smell like a sewer rat. Drag yourself out. Patricia Wells didn't answer. She finished the spill, folded the cloth, set it on the cart, both hands, unhurried, the way a person sets something down, when they have already decided what comes next. Then she reached beneath the trash bags, typed 4 words, to a contact saved as RB. The reply came back. In 11 seconds, the Patek Philippe was still missing from James Anderson's wrist. In 72 hours, James Anderson was going to lose something he couldn't replace. James Anderson just made the last mistake of his career.
Wrong move. He just fired the woman who owned the building. Let's get into it.
Patricia Wells punched in at 10:47 p.m. The time clock beeped. She tucked the paper slip into her front pocket and wheeled the service cart around the corner without looking up. The hallway stretched ahead of her, pale and fluorescent. The floor buffer hummed in the supply closet at the end. She could feel it through the soles of her shoes. A low, relentless vibration. Bone-deep familiar, the kind of sound that fills a body until there is nothing left to hear. She lifted the mop from the cart. Her hands settled into the grip without thought. The calluses on her fingertips had been there so long she sometimes forgot they were new. A year ago, she could not have named a single brand of industrial bleach. Now she knew them by smell, sharp and chemical and precise. It burned faintly at the back of her throat as she pushed the wet mop across the marble of the executive corridor. The scent mixed with something else up here. Expensive cologne, layered and cedar-heavy, soaked into the wallpaper from years of the same hallway, the same men, the same closed doors. She breathed it in and she breathed it out. She kept moving. The door to Suite 14 was slightly open. She did not slow down. She did not look in. But she noted it. She noted everything. That was the job. The real one beneath the one printed on her temp agency form. Her cart had 3 shelves. The bottom shelf held cleaning supplies, 2 spray bottles, a roll of paper towels, a folded microfiber cloth. The middle shelf held a gray trash bag cinched loosely at the top. Beneath the trash bag, pressed flat against the shelf and wrapped in a secondary liner, was a phone. Matte black, encrypted. The kind of device that did not exist in any catalog available to someone making $16.40 an hour. She had not needed to reach for it yet. By 11:05, she had worked through Suite 11 and Suite 12. The executive floor was quiet. Most of the staff were down in the ballroom managing the gala. The kitchen noise floated up through the vents. Dishes clattering, someone barking an order in Spanish, the low-pressure hiss of the dishwasher cycling. Up here, there was only the buffer, the bleach, and the silence she had built around herself like a second uniform. She reached Suite 14. The door had drifted another inch. She knocked twice, soft and flat-knuckled the way the agency required. No answer. She nudged it open with her shoulder, keeping her eyes on the floor, and pulled the cart in after her. The suite was large. An oval conference table sat at the center, surrounded by 8 leather chairs, each pushed back at a slightly different angle as if the meeting had ended quickly. On the table, 2 empty water pitchers, a scattering of branded notepads, and a single pen left uncapped. She started on the water pitchers. As she worked, she moved through the room without pattern, without pause, without anything that could be read as hesitation or interest. She straightened the chairs. She wiped the table edge with the microfiber cloth. She dropped the uncapped pen into the small waste bin near the door. Near the credenza, she paused. A single manila folder sat at the edge of the surface. The tab read, Phase 2, Bridgewell Severance Restructure Revised. Below the tab, in smaller print, draft, not for distribution. She did not touch it. She looked at it for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to read the tab line twice, long enough to note the revised timestamp visible through the cover sheet. Then she moved to the window and wiped the sill. By 11:22, she had returned to the service corridor. She reached into the cart, pulled the phone from beneath the trash bag, and typed a message to a contact listed only as RB. Final documents are sealed. Signing Monday at 9. Walk through tonight. The reply came in 11 seconds. Understood. In position. She powered the screen off, replaced the phone, and smoothed the liner back over the top. The cartwheel caught on a seam in the tile as she turned it. She freed it with one pull. She kept moving. She was not looking for anything she had not already found. That was the point. She had spent 4 nights on this floor. She had counted the cameras, 9 in the corridor, 2 in the stairwell, 1 angled low near the freight elevator. She had timed the security rotation. She had noted which managers stayed late, which ones left documents on conference tables, which ones could not quite bring themselves to close a door all the way before the weekend. She had not done any of this because she needed to. The acquisition was already done. The attorneys had signed off on Tuesday. The financial review was complete. The ink was dry on everything that mattered. She had done it because she needed to know what she was buying, not the balance sheet, not the asset list, not the liability column, though that had made for interesting reading. She needed to know what the building felt like at 11 p.m. on a Friday. She needed to know what it smelled like. She needed to know what it said about itself when nobody was watching and the lights were turned down low and the only people left inside were the ones who cleaned. The buffer in the supply closet was still going. She wheeled the cart past it, turned left toward the elevator bank, and pressed the call button. The doors opened. She pushed the cart inside. She was not there to clean his floors. The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Imperial held 300 people without effort. Crystal chandeliers hung at intervals across the ceiling, each one throwing light in every direction, soft and fractured and expensive. The tables were dressed in ivory linen heavy enough to hold its shape. Each centerpiece stood 18 inches tall. White roses and trailing greenery, the kind of arrangement that required a phone call to order and a separate invoice to remove. The room smelled of cedar cologne and warm bread, and the particular warmth of too many people in formal clothing standing close together. Patricia entered through the service door at the east wall. She kept the cart ahead of her, both hands on the handle, eyes tracking the floor between the tables. A bourbon glass had gone over near table 7. She had been radioed at 11:38. She came with the mop, the spray bottle, the folded cloth. The string quartet in the corner was playing something she did not recognize. Low and seamless, the kind of music designed to disappear. Waitstaff moved between tables and practiced arcs trays held level. Near the bar, a cluster of men in dark suits laughed at something, heads tilting in unison, drinks lifting together. She reached the spill. The bourbon had spread in a wide amber stain across the white marble, catching the chandelier light glittering faintly at the edges. She set the spray bottle on the cart, lip crouched, and began. "You." The voice came from her left. She did not turn immediately. She finished applying the cloth to the outer edge of the stain, working inward the way she had been trained, and then she looked up. James Anderson stood 4 feet away. He was tall in the way that men with money learn to be, spine straight, chin lifted, weight settled back on his heels as if the floor belonged to him because it did or near enough. The tuxedo was dark and fitted no excess fabric anywhere. On his left wrist, the Patek Philippe caught the chandelier light the same way the spilled bourbon had. His face was flushed neck, the color of something raw, and he was holding a glass with 2 fingers at the rim. He was not looking at the stain. He was looking at her. "How long does it take you people to respond to a simple radio call?" He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I've had guests standing over this mess for 10 minutes. She pressed the cloth flat against the floor. "I came as soon as I received the call, sir." "That's not what I asked." She did not answer. She kept working. The cloth moved in slow, deliberate circles, lifting the bourbon from the marble in steady degrees. He stepped closer. The cedar of his cologne arrived before he did. Heavy and thick, it settled over the chemical smell of the spray bottle like a hand pressed flat. He was close enough now that she could hear the ice shifting in his glass. "Did anybody else smell that stench?" he said. "Or is it just me?" The quartet kept playing. 300 heads did not turn all at once. It was slower than that. A glance here, a shoulder angling, a woman near table 4 lowering her fork without touching the food beneath it. The movement spread outward from James Anderson like a ripple, quiet and irreversible, until the room had reorganized itself around the space where he stood. Patricia's hands did not stop moving. "You smell like a sewer rat, girl." His voice was conversational, interested almost. "Like the projects crawled in with you." The cloth reached the center of the stain. She folded it once, pressed again. "I just finished my shift, sir." Her voice stayed level. He laughed. It was a full-sound, unhurried design to carry. The chandeliers, enormous and indifferent, held it for a moment before it dissolved. "I don't care," he said. "You're fired. Drag your stink out before my guests start gagging." The ice shifted again in his glass. Near table 4, Jennifer Carter's hand closed slowly around the stem of her water glass. She was the youngest person at the table, the only person in the room whose dress was not custom. She had bought it 14 months ago for a different event. She had told herself it still looked fine. Now she sat very still watching Patricia, and her hand tightened around the glass until the knuckles changed color. Patricia looked up, not at James, across him, past him to table 4. Jennifer met her eyes. 1 second, maybe less. Patricia gave the smallest shake of her head, a single lateral movement, barely visible, precise. Jennifer looked down at the tablecloth. Patricia set the cloth on the cart. She picked up the spray bottle and applied a second pass to the center of the stain where the bourbon had pooled deepest. The $200 a pour liquid had spread to the outer edge of her left shoe. A $15 slip-resistant work shoe scuffed at the toe, the tread worn smooth in a diagonal pattern from the same turning motion performed across the same kind of floor for the same number of hours. She pressed the cloth down again. She did not hurry. She did not slow. James Anderson watched her work with the expression of a man watching something confirm exactly what he already believed. He thought her hands were shaking because she was afraid. They were not shaking, they were moving with the same economy they always moved with, the economy of a person who had spent a year learning exactly which pressure applied to exactly which surface, removed exactly which kind of stain without leaving a trace. He thought silence meant submission. It was not submission, it was a countdown, and it had already started. The room had not moved. That was the thing about it. 300 people, and not one of them had moved. Senators, judges, hedge fund partners, the kind of men and women whose names appeared on buildings and hospital wings and endowment plaques. They sat with their hands in their laps and their eyes on their plates and their champagne flutes held carefully as if the crystal might crack if they gripped too hard or let go too soon. The string quartet had stopped. Patricia did not register the exact moment it happened. One measure, the music was there, the next it was not. The silence that replaced it was not empty. It had texture. It had weight. It pressed against the walls of the ballroom and filled the space between the tables and settled over the ivory linen like something that had been waiting for permission to land. James Anderson had not moved either. He stood with his glass in his right hand and his phone in his left. The phone was out now. Patricia had not seen him reach for it. She had been finishing the stain, pressing the cloth into the last corner of the spill when the white flash hit the marble beside her hand. She looked up. He had the camera angled down, not at the floor, at her face. "Smile," he said. He was not smiling himself. "I want to remember this one." The shutter sound fired twice. 300 people stared at their plates. Patricia did not move her hands away from the cloth. She did not turn her face from the light. She held still, completely and deliberately still, and let the camera take what it wanted. James lowered the phone. He turned it outward, half presenting it to the room the way a man presents a winning hand. "I'm sending this to every placement agency in the city," he said. "Every hotel, every catering group, every event staffing firm inside a 50-mile radius." His thumb moved across the screen. "By Monday morning, you won't be able to get hired to clean a gas station bathroom." The woman at the nearest table lifted her champagne flute. She drank from it slowly. She did not look up. A judge, 2 tables back, unfolded his napkin, refolded it, and set it across his knee. A waiter near the service door found a reason to turn toward the wall. James watched Patricia with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who expected a response and was prepared to enjoy waiting for it. She was crouched over the last of the spill. Her left hand held the cloth. Her right hand rested flat on the marble fingers, spread weight, distributed exactly as it had been before the camera appeared. The marble was cool. She could feel the faint texture of it through her palm, the microscopic grain of polished stone, solid and indifferent. Beside her knee, a piece of the broken bourbon glass caught the chandelier light. She reached for it. Her fingers closed around the fragment. She lifted it carefully, turned it once to check the edges, and placed it into the small collection bag on the lower shelf of her cart. Her hands did not tremble. They moved at the same pace they always moved. James's jaw tightened. It was small, the tightening, almost imperceptible. But it was there. She had not reacted the way he expected. She had not flinched from the flash, had not turned away, had not covered her face. She had not cried. She had not argued. She had not broken the posture of someone who was simply doing a job carefully without excess. He needed her to break. The room needed her to break. That was how this was supposed to go. "Are you even listening to me?" His voice had an edge to it now, a sharpness that had not been there before. "Yes, sir." She set the bag back on the cart shelf. "Then you understand what I just said." "I understood you, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he lifted his phone again and took a third photograph. The flash hit the marble, the cart, the side of her face. She did not look away from what she was doing. The room held its breath. Senator David Foster sat at the head of table 6 feet from where Patricia crouched. He had a glass of water in front of him, untouched condensation beating slowly down the side. He was watching James with an expression that had not changed in 3 minutes. Careful, unreadable, the expression of a man who had sat through 1,000 rooms that felt exactly like this one, and had learned that expression as a form of survival. He did not speak. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that the sound of Patricia's cartwheel catching slightly on the marble tile as she shifted position traveled across the entire room without effort. She stood. She straightened to her full height, unhurried, and folded the used cloth over the cart's side bar. She checked the floor one final time with a flat professional scan, the way she checked every floor, the way she had checked every floor across 4 nights on this assignment. The stain was gone. The marble was clean, dry, unstreaked, the same continuous surface it had been before the glass went over. No residue, no outline, no evidence that anything had happened here at all. She placed both hands on the cart handle. James Anderson stood between her and the service door with 300 silent witnesses behind him, and a phone full of her photographs, and the absolute certainty of a man who had done this before and had never once been required to account for it. He had given her exactly what she needed. He did not know that yet. She had come into this room with one objective. She was leaving with something better. She was leaving with his voice, his face, his words, and 4 security cameras mounted at the east, west, and north walls of the grand ballroom of the Rosewood Imperial Hotel, each one recording at 1080p, each one with a timestamp that would hold up in any court in the state. She began moving the cart toward the door. He stepped aside. Barely. Just enough. She passed him without looking at his face.
Wait, he threw glass at her feet and told her to crawl out. If that were me, I would have mopped his face with that dirty water. Imagine standing in a room with 300 millionaires and nobody says a single word. The audacity is real.
The service corridor was narrow and fluorescent and honest. No chandeliers here. No ivory linen, no trailing greenery, no cedar cologne soaked into the walls from years of the same men passing through. The corridor smelled of dish soap and metal and the particular industrial cold of a space that existed only to be used. Overhead, the fluorescent tube at the far end flickered at irregular intervals. On, off, on. The rhythm of something failing slowly. Patricia was transferring the used cloths into the disposal bag when she heard the door. It opened hard, not kicked, but close. The kind of push that communicates something without requiring words. James Anderson came through first. Behind him, a second man, shorter, heavier, the tuxedo, straining slightly at the shoulders, a hedge fund tan and a hedge fund jaw, and the specific expression of a man accustomed to problems being solved before he finished describing them. He was looking at his wrist, then at his wrist again, then at the empty space where his wrist had been telling him something all evening. She was the last one near that table, the second man said, not to Patricia, to James. James looked at her. Empty your pockets, he said. She did not move immediately. She finished clipping the disposal bag closed, set it on the bottom shelf, and then she turned to face him fully. I'm sorry. You heard me. He crossed the corridor in 4 steps. The space between them collapsed fast. She had the metal serving station at her back, a fixed surface bolted to the wall, and James Anderson in front of her, close enough that the cedar cologne arrived as a physical pressure. He was taller than her by 8 inches. He used all 8. My colleague is missing an $85,000 watch. You were the only staff member in that section of the ballroom during the window. I was cleaning a spill, sir, in front of 300 people. That's not an answer. His voice had dropped. It was quieter now than it had been in the ballroom. Quieter was worse. That's a deflection. I know what deflection looks like. I've fired 12 people for it. The second man had moved to the left, positioning himself at the corridor entrance without appearing to. It was practiced. The geometry of it was practiced. Patricia looked at James. I did not take anything from that room, she said. I think you did. He leaned forward. The hot, stale pressure of his breath arrived at her face, carrying bourbon and certainty, and the specific odor of a man who had never once in his adult life been told no by someone in her position. And I think if I call the right people tonight, I can have you detained before you reach the subway. I have a friend in the precinct. Good man. Very responsive. His chin lifted. I also know people at immigration. Very thorough people. The kind who don't need much paperwork to start a process. By Tuesday, you could be dealing with something that makes losing this job look like the good part of your week. The fluorescent tube at the end of the corridor flickered. On, off, on. Patricia said nothing. She let the threat finish. She let it occupy the space it was designed to occupy, let it land against the metal of the serving station and the tile of the floor and the flickering light overhead, let it fill the corridor the way he intended it to fill the corridor. Then she looked up, not at him, past him, and slightly left to the wall above the corridor entrance. Sir, she said. Her voice had not changed. Same register, same pace. Same careful, professional flatness she had carried through 4 hours of this building and 1 hour of that ballroom. There are 4 cameras in this corridor. James did not move. 1 above the entrance behind you, she said. 1 above the service exit at the far end. 1 mounted at the bend covering the stretch between the 2. And 1 angled low near the freight elevator positioned specifically to capture the serving station area. She paused. That one has audio capability. The specification is posted on the compliance sheet in the supply closet. It has been recording since I entered this corridor 18 minutes ago. The second man's expression did not change, but his weight shifted, barely perceptible 1/2 inch back on his heel, the kind of shift that happens below conscious decision. James Anderson stared at her. She met his eyes, without effort, without aggression, without anything that could be characterized as a challenge. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at a fact. I would also note, she said, that the watch you're describing. A Patek Philippe, you said. Calatrava case, most likely given the event profile. Those models have a documented clasp failure rate at the secondary hinge. It's a known issue with the 5227 series. If your colleague was holding a glass for most of the evening, the clasp would have been under lateral pressure. She kept her voice even. You might want to check the floor near table 11, specifically the area under the right side chair where the carpet runner meets the marble edge. Things roll left in this room. The floor has a 2-degree grade. The corridor was very quiet. The fluorescent tube flickered once and held. James had not moved. He was standing in the same position he had taken when he crossed the corridor close and certain and above her by 8 inches, but something had shifted inside the geometry of it. The ceiling had not changed. The walls had not changed. The math of the space was identical. He was the one who felt smaller. His mouth opened, then closed. You'd better hope, he said, that camera doesn't show what I think it shows. It shows exactly what happened, she said. That's why I mentioned it. She reached down, unclipped the disposal bag from the bottom shelf and placed it into the main cart liner with both hands. Deliberate, unhurried, the sound of it was very small in the corridor. James Anderson stood behind her while she worked. He had come into this corridor to bury her. He had described his tools, named his contacts, laid out his timeline, and delivered every word of it on camera in audio with a timestamp in a room she had just told him was recording. He was digging his own grave. She had handed him the shovel the moment she said nothing. If you want to see exactly how this arrogant CEO loses his entire empire in less than a minute, you know what to do. Now back to Patricia. The basement break room had one window. It sat high on the east wall, narrow and horizontal, the kind of window that existed to meet a building code rather than admit light. Through it at this hour, nothing was visible except the underside of the sidewalk grate above and the occasional sweep of headlights from the street. The fluorescent tube in here was older than the one in the corridor. It did not flicker. It simply hummed a low and constant frequency, the sound of something that had been running too long and would not admit it. Patricia sat on the bench along the wall. Her cart was parked outside. Her shift had ended 12 minutes ago. She had not yet moved toward the elevator. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and old plastic and the particular staleness of a space where people ate quickly and spoke quietly and did not stay longer than necessary. A folding table occupied the center. 3 chairs around it, mismatched, each one slightly different from the others, collected over years from different sources, none of them designed for this room. On the table, someone had left a styrofoam cup with half an inch of coffee in the bottom. It had been there when she arrived. She had not touched it. She had intended to sit for 4 minutes, check her phone, confirm the message to Robert had gone through, and go. She had a car waiting 2 blocks north. She had a meeting in 9 hours. She had everything she needed, and she knew she had everything she needed, and still she was sitting on a break room bench in a bleach-stained uniform in the basement of a building she was going to own by Monday morning. She was sitting there because her legs had simply stopped, not from exhaustion. She had worked longer hours than this and harder ones, not from fear. She knew what the cameras had recorded. She knew what Robert had waiting. She knew the precise sequence of events that would begin at 9 a.m., the documents, the announcement, the call to James Anderson's board. And she knew how that sequence ended because she had designed it. She was sitting there because of the photograph. She had not noticed it fall. Somewhere between the ballroom and the service corridor, between the flash of James's camera and the quiet of the freight elevator, the photograph had slipped from the small interior pocket of her uniform top. She did not know exactly when. She had not noticed it was gone until she reached the break room and pressed her hand to her chest out of habit the way she always did, and felt only the seam of the pocket. She had gone back. She had retraced the route in reverse, the service corridor, the freight elevator threshold, the stretch of hallway between the linen closet and the east ballroom entrance. She had found it near the ballroom door. A man's shoe, a waiter moving fast with a tray unaware, had caught the edge of it in passing. The photograph lay face up on the tile. The shoe print crossed the center of it in a pale gray diagonal, the rubber tread pattern pressed directly across the face of the woman in the image. Her mother. 1986 by the dress. Standing in front of a house that no longer existed, squinting slightly into the sun, smiling at whoever held the camera. Patricia had picked it up with both hands. She had stood in the hallway for a moment that was longer than she intended. Now she sat with the photograph on her knee, the corners creased from years in the pocket, the surface dulled in the places she had handled it most. The shoe print was still there. She pressed her thumb gently against the edge of it. The gray did not lift. It had set into the surface of the image. Permanent or close enough? Why are you doing this? The question arrived without preamble, the way the real questions always did, underneath everything, waiting for a quiet room. You own the building. You have the documents. Robert is in position. You have the footage, the audio, the timestamp, the watch location, the compliance sheet, the 4 cameras, and everything they recorded. And you are sitting in a basement break room at 12:47 in the morning with a dirty shoe print on your mother's face, asking yourself why you are doing this. You could have announced it from a boardroom. You could have sent a letter. You could have had Robert make the call on Friday morning, professional and clean, no gala, no uniform, no mop, no bleach on your hands at 1 a.m. You could have acquired his company and restructured his board and ended his career without setting foot in this building once. She looked at the photograph. Her mother had built the first company from a folding table in a kitchen in a neighborhood that did not have a name that meant anything to the people in that ballroom upstairs. She had built it without a tuxedo, without a Patek Philippe, without a room full of senators to absorb the light she generated. She had built it with her hands and her hours and the specific, unspectacular stubbornness of someone who had decided once that the world's opinion of what she deserved was not a document she was required to sign. Patricia wiped the photograph clean with the edge of her sleeve. The gray lifted partially. Not completely. Not enough to erase it, but enough. She tucked it back into the pocket. She pressed the seam closed with her thumb. She stood. Across the hall, faintly, she could still hear the gala. The low pressure of 300 people above her, moving, eating, existing in a room she had cleaned and recorded and walked through without a single person asking her name. She thought about what James Anderson had said upstairs in front of all of them. She pulled out her phone. She typed 4 words to Robert, give him 1 chance. She pressed send. Then she picked up her cart and walked toward the elevator and did not look at the floor once. The ballroom had thinned. It was past 1 now, and the gala was moving into its final hour, the particular diminishment of a late party where the important people had already left, and the ones remaining were either very drunk or very determined to get their money's worth from the open bar. The string quartet had packed their instruments. A DJ had taken the corner playing something low and forgettable. The ivory tablecloths were marked now, wine rings and breadcrumbs, and the small damage of an evening fully used. James Anderson stood near the bar. He had a fresh drink. He had been standing in approximately the same position for 40 minutes, which was the position of a man who needed the room to come to him, rather than the other way around. His tie had been loosened by a 1/4 inch. The Brioni tuxedo was still immaculate. The Patek Philippe was still gone from his wrist. He had not mentioned it again after the corridor. He was talking to 2 men Patricia did not recognize. His voice carried the particular projection of someone performing confidence for an audience that had not asked for a performance. She came through the east service door. She was still in the uniform. Gray top, gray trousers, the bleach-stained hem, the slip-resistant shoes with the worn tread. She had left the cart in the corridor. She carried nothing. She walked across the ballroom floor without altering her pace, the same pace she had held for 5 hours steady and without announcement. Senator David Foster saw her first. He was at table 1, still the glass of water in front of him mostly untouched, the condensation long dried. He had been watching the room the way he watched all rooms carefully, with the patience of a man who understood that the significant moments rarely announced themselves. When Patricia came through the east door, he went still. He recognized her, not from tonight, from before tonight, from a conference room on the 42nd floor of a building 4 blocks north of here 14 months ago, where she had sat across a table from him and 3 other people, and outlined the framework of an acquisition that would, when completed, represent the largest private restructuring in the city's hospitality sector in 11 years. He set down his water glass. James was mid-sentence when the senator stood. James. Foster's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of a man who had learned over decades that volume was the instrument of people who were not certain they would be listened to. I need to ask you something. James turned. The performance expression stayed in place. Senator, of course. Foster looked at Patricia, then back at James. Do you have any idea, he said, who you've been speaking to tonight? The two men James had been talking to exchanged a glance. James did not look at Patricia. He looked at Foster, and something behind his eyes recalibrated a subtle, rapid adjustment, the expression of a man trying to locate the correct response before the question finished landing. She's a temp worker, James said, from the agency. No, Foster said. One word, flat and final and taking up no more space than it needed. Patricia stopped 2 feet from the edge of table 1. She did not look at James immediately. She looked at Jennifer Carter, who was still at table 4, still in the dress she had bought 14 months ago for a different occasion, still with both hands wrapped around the water glass. Jennifer was watching her with an expression that had moved somewhere beyond shock into a territory that did not have a clean name. Patricia held her gaze for 1 second. Then she turned to James Anderson. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her posture. She stood in the bleach-stained uniform with her hands at her sides and her weight evenly distributed, and she looked at him the way she had looked at the corridor camera, the way she had looked at the ballroom walls, the way she had looked at every surface in this building over 4 nights with complete, unhurried attention. My name, she said, is Patricia Wells. James stared at her. I am the 51% majority owner of Meridian Capital Group. She did not rush. Each sentence arrived at the same pace, the same register, the same careful flatness. Meridian Capital Group completed its acquisition of Bridgewell Industries at close of business on Tuesday. The paperwork was filed with the SEC on Wednesday morning. The formal announcement is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. She paused. You work for me. As of Tuesday, you have worked for me. The room did not react all at once. It moved the way the room had moved in Chapter 2 outward from a center point in a slow, irreversible ripple. A head turning, a hand lowering a glass, a conversation stopping mid-word. James Anderson's knees did something involuntary. It was small, the movement almost nothing. But he had to catch the edge of table 1 with his left hand to absorb it. A single fast grab at the linen, and the cocktail glass at the table's edge rocked once on its base before settling. His expensive leather shoes made a sound on the marble, a short, sharp squeak of a man stumbling backward in a body that had not yet received the instruction to move. That's... He stopped. That's not... The east doors opened. Robert Bennett came through them with the particular velocity of a man who had been waiting in a corridor for a specific cue and had received it. He was carrying a document folder, dark blue, the Meridian Capital logo embossed on the cover in silver. He moved between the tables without looking at them, without acknowledging the room, without pausing, and stopped beside Patricia. He opened the folder. He turned it outward facing James. The acquisition agreement. Final executed, countersigned. The timestamp on the cover page read, Tuesday, 6:47 p.m. Below the timestamp in the signature block, Patricia's name, and below that her title. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Capital Group. James looked at the document, then at Patricia, then at the document again. His neck had gone the color of something past raw. His jaw worked once, twice the motion of a man attempting to locate language in a place where language had temporarily stopped being available. The Brioni tuxedo was still immaculate. The watch was still gone from his wrist. He looked in this moment in front of the remaining guests of his own gala very small. The security footage from this evening, Patricia said, has already been requested by our legal team. The corridor audio is included. She let that land. She did not hurry past it. You'll be hearing from Robert's office on Monday, before the 9 o'clock announcement. She looked at him for one more second. Even unhurried, complete. Then she looked at Jennifer Carter. Jennifer was standing now. She had not decided to stand. She was simply standing, both hands still holding the water glass, the glass pressed against her sternum like something she was protecting, or something that was protecting her. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and she was not looking away. Patricia gave her the same small nod she had given her in the ballroom hours ago when she had told her to stay quiet. Different meaning now. She didn't just buy the building, she bought his consequences. Monday came in gray and cold, the kind of morning that arrived without ceremony, flat light through flat clouds, the city already moving before the sun had decided what it intended to do. On the 42nd floor of the Meridian Capitol building, the windows faced east, and at 6:53 a.m., there was nothing to see through them except the gradual, indifferent brightening of a sky that owed no one anything. Patricia was already at her desk. She had been there since 6. The acquisition documents were arranged in 3 stacks on the left side of the surface. Executed agreements, board notification letters, the SEC filing confirmation with its federal timestamp and its case number and its absolute irreversible finality. On the right side, a single cup of coffee, black, and the photograph face up, the creased corners smoothed as far as they would go, the partial shoe print still visible across the center. She had placed the photograph there deliberately. At 7:14, Robert called. FBI confirmed they're moving at 8. I know, she said. The wire fraud documentation from the audit is clean. Everything from the Phase 2 restructuring files, the ones in Suite 14, they match the pattern going back 6 quarters. I know. A pause. How do you feel? She looked at the photograph. Ready, she said. Tell Jennifer to come up at 8:30. I want to do her promotion in person. She hung up. She picked up the coffee. She looked at the east windows and the gray, uncommitted sky beyond them. And she thought about a kitchen table in a neighborhood without a useful name, and a woman sitting at it at 6 in the morning with her hands around a cup and a decision already made. At 8:02 a.m., James Anderson's penthouse doorbell rang. He had not been sleeping. He had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the living room in a white terry cloth bathrobe, holding a coffee mug with both hands, watching the street below with the unfocused attention of a man who had been watching it since approximately 2 in the morning. The gala had ended. His car had brought him home. He had not changed out of the tuxedo until 4. The doorbell rang again. He crossed to the intercom. The building concierge's voice came through, clipped and careful. Mr. Anderson, there are federal agents in the lobby. He set the mug down on the kitchen counter. He missed. The mug caught the counter edge, tipped once, and fell. It hit the pristine white tile of the kitchen floor and broke cleanly, the handle separating from the body in a single piece, the coffee spreading outward in a dark, widening stain across the surface. He paid someone else to keep clean. The pieces lay where they fell. He did not pick them up. He stood looking at them when the knock came at the door. 3 agents. The lead one was a woman, compact and unhurried, a federal badge and a document folder, and the expression of someone for whom this was a Tuesday. She handed him the warrant. He read the first paragraph. He read it again. The words were familiar words in an unfamiliar sequence. Wire fraud, securities, manipulation, falsified, restructuring, disclosures. 6 quarters of documented pattern. His hands were shaking so badly the paper moved. The handcuffs were cold. That was the detail that arrived most clearly, cutting through the bathrobe and the broken mug and the warrant and the view of the street he had been watching all night. The cold, metallic click of them closing around his wrists. 2 sounds, precise and sequential, each one a period at the end of a sentence that had been writing itself for a very long time. They walked him through his own lobby. The concierge looked at the floor. At 8:31 a.m., Jennifer Carter stepped out of the elevator on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Capitol building. She had not known what to wear. She had stood in front of her closet for 11 minutes that morning, which was 9 minutes longer than she normally stood anywhere, and had chosen the same dress she had worn to the gala. It still looked fine. She had decided somewhere between the subway and the lobby that it was going to keep looking fine, and that was the end of it. Patricia was standing when Jennifer came in, not behind the desk, in front of it beside the window with the gray morning behind her, and the coffee on the desk, and the photograph beside it. "Sit down," Patricia said. "Please." Jennifer sat. She looked at the document Patricia placed in front of her. "Senior Associate Meridian Capital Group, effective immediately. Below that a number." Jennifer read it twice. The second time, something in her face moved quiet and private, the movement of a person absorbing a fact that is larger than the space they had prepared for it. "You didn't have to," she started. "I know," Patricia said. "That's not why I did it." Jennifer looked up. "You knew what was happening in that room," Patricia said. "You had been watching it for longer than one night, and you stayed." She let that sit for a moment, not as an accusation, as a fact delivered without judgment. "People stay for a lot of reasons. I'm not interested in the reason. I'm interested in what you do next." Jennifer looked at the document again. Her hands were flat on the surface, both of them the way they had been on the water glass at table 4, but the knuckles were not white this time. "Okay," she said. It was a small word. It did not try to be more than it was. At 9:02 a.m., the Meridian Capital announcement went public. 14 lines, clean and formal, distributed simultaneously to the SEC portal, 3 financial wire services, and the inboxes of every Bridgewell Industries board member. The 14th line noted that all event staff who had worked the Rosewood Imperial Gala on Friday evening would receive quadruple their contracted shift rate processed before end of business. The broken mug was still on the floor of James Anderson's penthouse kitchen when the cleaning crew arrived at noon. The coffee had dried by then. The stain on the white tile was the same shape roughly as the bourbon spill on the white marble of the grand ballroom. The same dark spreading signature of something gone over irretrievable permanent. He had thought she was just the help. She had cleaned him out completely.
Fiction. But that feeling, being judged by the uniform you wear, while you're just trying to survive. What would you have done if you were standing in that ballroom watching it happen? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe.